everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod to do our season recap part 2 of the non-MSU Big Ten. We'll go from Minnesota through Illinois. Just a reminder, please leave a written review on your podcast player. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe, leave a comment, please. It helps the algorithms and other Spartan fans find us. So let's just get into it, Rod, here. Start with Minnesota. The Gophers were 15 and 17 overall, 7 and 13, like everybody. I mean, who wasn't 7 and 13 in the Big Ten?
Right.
There's 7-13 in the Big Ten. Ken Pom overall 83. Notable players: Dawson Garcia, Luce Patterson. And I think this is one, they have the second. So prediction, I think we had them last, I think, right in the Big Ten of 18th.
Yep.
And obviously it was Washington. But this is exactly what you said last year. You said, this is a team that's not going to be very good, but they're going to have games where suddenly Dawson Garcia goes, nuclear. And they did that. I mean, he did that. He did that at UCLA, right? He went insane and beat the Bruins. And profile not good, 83, 7-13 the Big Ten, not good, but they easily made the Big Ten tournament. And but it wasn't enough. Ben Johnson fired, replaced by Nico Medved, who had been sort of in the wings for a while. I guess he was over at Colorado State. So he returns back to Minnesota. So there's every reason to think they'll be a better team too. And they'll at least have sounds like they'll have more financial support than Ben Johnson ever did. Because it sounds like that was his biggest problem, that he wasn't able to get the financial support, whether that's him or personality clash with the donors. I mean, it's entirely possible a place like Minnesota, there's like 1 or 2 big donors that are important. And if they don't like you, then there's not much you can do. You're just kind of out of luck. And you're just not going to get enough other support. And I'll let you go here. But I think, like, when you look at most places, I think, we'll just focus on basketball because, that's what we do. But when it comes to NIL support, it really comes down to, I think, a few big donors that really make a difference. I think you're unlikely to get enough small-time donors that are excited enough about basketball to pitch in a couple, extra bucks. Because if you're that kind of person, you're probably, like at Michigan State, you're going to be spending it to the university to get credit with NIL, with like your points for tickets and things like that. You're a lot less likely to throw it into some NIL collective. And that's why I think small-time donors really don't have much of an impact on NIL. It's pretty much big-time donors. And my guess is in Minnesota, they don't have the big-time donors, and you're definitely not going to have the little ones.
Well, whatever donors they have, supposedly the story was they flat out said,
yeah,
I'm not putting, or we're not putting money behind the program if Ben Johnson's still the coach. So that was the story. It's a really interesting thing because I can understand if you just look solely at the record. They say, well, Ben Johnson was there, it was 4 years, I think, and never made the NCAA tournament, didn't have winning seasons, all of that.
Yeah.
All true. But it goes to show you how just taking a cursory look at those numbers, I think, can be misleading, because that guy was behind the 8 ball in so many ways. And yet year in, year out, I think the only year, maybe his second year, was kind of a disappointment.
Yeah.
They were really, really bad. But his first year and the last 2 seasons, I think you can look at it. Here's a simple equation. This doesn't tell the whole story, but I think it says something. They finished, what was it, overall in KenPom? They were 83rd.
Third, yeah.
And yet they were 7-13 in the league. Among those 7 wins, they beat Michigan, they beat Oregon, and they beat UCLA and Nebraska, but the latter 2 away from home. That's pretty good for a team that the KenPom numbers, the analytics tell you this is not a talented team. It's Dawson Garcia and a bunch of guys, right?
Yeah.
And yet they were able to carve out 7 wins in the league. They were, some of them impressive against good teams. I think you can make a pretty good argument that Ben Johnson overachieved last year.
I think he's a good coach. Like
I think you can make an argument that he overachieved in 3 of his 4 seasons.
Yep, I agree.
And yet he's gone, and his era will be quickly forgotten because not much in terms of tangible success was achieved. I feel badly for that because I agree with you. I think he's a good coach. I think he's demonstrated that. For Minnesota, look, I picked them last. So 7-13 to me, he got everything out of that team there was to get,
Exactly.
in my opinion. We mentioned, the individuals. We mentioned Garcia, and he did have a very, very strong year. 19.2 points, 7.5 rebounds, also 2 assists per game, and zero point 0.8 blocks per game. 47% overall, 78% at the line, 37% from three. He was a true three-level threat. And as you said, there were times this year where he just dragged them across the finish line to get a win by himself. The
Yep.
other guy that I think was worth mentioning was Lucai Patterson, who was a transfer. He was the only other double digit scorer, 11.6 points per game, 3.6 rebounds, 3.3 assists. The shooting numbers were not great, 37% overall, 26% from three. But he was a guy who, at times, in some of those wins, proved to be very capable of stepping up and hitting big shots. I thought he was that kind of presence for them, even though the overall efficiency wasn't great. Other than that, Mike Mitchell, who had been good the year before, was kind of banged up. I didn't feel ever really fully got on track.
Yep.
Guys like Parker Fox gave him everything he had to give. He's just not very good. Uh,
Yeah.
but it all added up to a pretty competitive team.
Yeah. No, they were a team that was, well, I mean, they kind of were their own destruction. Like they had an opportunity to have a better record, and then they blew that game against Washington after having a couple games in a row where they got sort of hot. So I don't know. It's not surprising what happened. And Ben Johnson, although I think he's a good coach, he was not able to maintain the. Certainly, he wasn't able to retain talent, and whether that's a reflection of just the lack of financial support that he needed with an NIL
I
or
don't think
some
there's
other
any.
issue.
I don't think there's even a debate about that.
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
that's they lost. Here's the thing to keep in mind: they had um, two guys who were playing in. Well, I guess one of them was playing in the round of 32 for Al Payne from
hmm
Texas A&M, a team
yep,
that lost to Michigan. And then the point guard Hawkins, who had been so good the year before, was starting for Texas Tech, who got to the Elite Eight, right?
yeah,
Um, those two guys would have been pretty good in
yep,
Minnesota uniforms this year, right? And both of them absolutely 100%, beyond a shadow of a doubt, left because of NIL. They just got paid. Texas Tech passing out a lot of money. Texas A&M passing out a decent amount of money.
yeah,
Certainly more than Minnesota. I mean, Payne is a Minnesota kid. He left his home state. It's just none of it's a surprise. So I
yeah,
think that's beyond debate. Now, will that change as they move into the Nico Medved era? We'll see. Nico Medved's a good coach. I don't think that was any kind of bad hire.
yeah,
But are they going to support him more than they've supported Johnson? We'll see.
yeah. Well, Minnesota's going to try and wash away the memories of Ben Johnson with the new regime, just like you ought to contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids to wash away your windows. You wash them off so that you can see it through them clearly. You can get them to take care of the inside of your windows, the outside of your windows, the screens, the windowsills. They can also power wash your house too. Get rid of that grime. So contact them today. Make sure you get a hold of that. 15% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. You can do that at our support page at tffinots.com/support. There you can get a hold of Troy and his team in the very, very, very large greater Grand Rapids area. And they'll take care of things in your house. You will be very glad you did. They do a great job in my house. I'm very confident they'll do the same in yours. Or if it's a business, whatever it might be. All right, so we're going to get outside the 7-13 teams finally in the Big Ten, and we make to number 11, Rutgers. The overall 15-17 for the year, 8-12 in the Big Ten. So you can see right there, not a great out of conference schedule of 7-5. Ken Palm overall, they're 70th. Notable players were the most notable of notable players: Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey, both projected first round picks in the NBA draft. They were the both top 5 picks, and so every reason that Rutgers had to expect a really great season, except they lost the rest of their team. And so it's just those two guys and a couple other guys who are kind of along for the ride. So I'll let you go through the profile because I think Steve Peichel has had a profile of what Rutgers looks like usually, and this year was very, very different.
Yeah, I characterized it as, a classic example of a Faustian bargain in that you can imagine Mephistopheles tapping Steve Peichel on the shoulder and saying, Steve, don't you want to have not one, but two top five picks in the NBA draft? Steve Peichel would say, of course, Mephistopheles. And the Faustian bargain part of it is that everybody else who Peichel had imagined fitting in around those super talents, the likes of which Rutgers never gets in its history, left.
Yeah.
And so what he ended up with was a team with two extremely talented freshmen, but nevertheless freshmen, and not nearly enough around them to make Rutgers competitive. I think a lot of people, myself included, felt like there would probably be enough with those guys to at least be in the mix for a tournament bid. And the reality is that they were never close. That 70
Yeah.
number in Ken Palm is a pretty accurate reflection of what they were. I know they got to 8-12 in the league. They won 3 of their last 5 to get there. But this was not a team. And you mentioned the non-conference. I mean, you go losing to Kennesaw State, and then, and to their credit, they played competitively in losses to Alabama and Texas A&M, but they still lost. And then you go losing to Princeton. After that,
Yeah.
it puts you behind the 8 ball. And they never were really in the mix legitimately for a tournament bid. And so we see what happens. You change your profile, your program that's been built on effort and hard work, defense and rebounding, and you have a lot of success with that relative to the program's historical track record. And then you sign the deal with the devil to get these two super talents, but it's all somehow worse in the end. And I think that's a pretty accurate description of what happened at Rutgers. If you look at their profile as a team, this team was 55th offensively. By Rutgers standards, that's pretty good. And the
Yeah.
main reason for that, frankly, I would put at the feet of the two freshmen. Those were the guys who
Hmm.
were shot makers, carried them, et cetera. But defense, 116th in the country.
That's like Iowa region.
The
Not
year
quite as bad.
prior,
Yeah.
where Rutgers was also 15 and 17 overall, same overall record, they were fifth defensively. The year before that, sixth. The year
Yeah.
before that, 53rd. The year before that, 16th. The year before that, sixth. The year before that, 46th. You get the point.
Yeah.
Consistent top 50 defenses and frequently top 10, all the way down to 116. Rebounding, offensive rebounding, 154, defensive rebounding, 302. I'm not going to
Oh
go through
man.
year by year, but I just assure you that doesn't come close to the normal profile that Steve Peichel built his program with.
Yeah.
So this was a brief bolt from the blue. Those two freshmen were one and dones. That was always understood going in. And I just look at it and I have to wonder, what was it all for?
Yeah.
And if you're a Rutgers fan, aren't you asking that question? And now you have to think about, can Peichel get this thing back on track?
Exactly. Can you get back to what you used to do
Right.
with new people?
You
You've
know,
lost
the,
that culture, but
just to
it's always
look
a
at
risk, of
the
course, with Portal.
to look at those two guys, I mean, they really did play very well. Dylan Harper, 19.4 points, 4.6 boards, 4 assists per game, 48% overall, 33% from three, 75 at the line. He'll be a lottery pick. So will Ace Bailey, 17.6 points, 7.2 rebounds, shot 46% overall, 35% from three, 69% at the line. Those guys were more or less as advertised. I don't
Yeah.
think, other than the fact that Harper was banged up a little bit at times, I don't think you can say there was any kind of real legitimate disappointment with what they did. It's just that they didn't have anybody around them.
Yeah.
And, how much better would that team have been if Cliff Amore had stuck around and played with those two
Oh, yeah.
guys? They'd had a center like that, you know? Some of the guards they lost, how much better would they have been? It's just, this is another program, though, where NIL is a factor.
Right.
And And I think it has been, and we've seen it. We've seen guys like Cam Spencer and Paul Mulcahy, who seemed like perfect fits, especially Mulcahy in that
Yeah.
program, leave basically because the NIL wasn't there.
And how bad's the NIL? It's so bad he went to Washington, and that
Right.
was before Sprinkle came.
Yeah.
That's that shows you how bad that. So before any Michigan State fans start complaining about Michigan State's NIL situation, always just look across the country to the East Coast, the Rutgers, and you'll feel better about yourself. All right, so then move on to first year head coach. I can't think of his name right now for Ohio State. Uh, anyway, 17-15 overall, 9-11 the Big Ten.
Diebler.
Diebler, thank you, Jake Diebler. Yes, it's like Jake something. I couldn't think. Ken
Yeah,
Palm
sorry
overall,
about
very
that.
good,
I jump
37.
in.
Notable players: Bruce Thornton, Devin Royal, and we were a little surprised that this is an opportunity. It looked like for Ohio State to pick up uh, someone else as far as a coach versus Diebler. They decided to go with the interim coach who finished it pretty well in the prior year. Although I feel like it's just an Ohio State thing to sort of play well at the end of the Big Ten season and then sort of not do well in the middle portion. And this team is, I think, less than what I think people had expected. And I'm now at the point where I'm just going to predict them to be worse than I think they should be, whoever they have for personnel,
Yeah.
because they
I
just,
mean,
I mean,
it,
whether
it
it's new coach, but it seems like the same kind of team as far as how they failed to kind of live up to their potential, right? They just kind of like they're middling.
it's kind of settled into that. You look at 37th overall, 30th ranked offense, pretty good. Unlike the end of the Chris Holtman era, where they were really bad defensively for several years in a row, they were actually 50th. So they weren't great, but they weren't horrible. And yet it all adds up to 17 and 15,
Yeah.
losing record in the league, out of the tournament. And they were another team like Nebraska, had every opportunity to play themselves in. They ended with an away game at Indiana in the regular season. They lost by 6, but then they got Iowa in the Big Ten tournament. If they'd won that game, I think they were probably in. They lose it. They lose it 77 to
Yep.
70. They're home without a tournament bid, without a postseason performance yet again. You do have to wonder, is it something that's kind of just become ingrained in the program in Ohio State that they're going to underachieve? I thought this year it was pretty obvious to me that they were caught short. They seemed to have a backcourt capable of doing it, but then they had, weird deal with Michi Johnson, who was starting, and then this guy, you want to talk about a prime example of what college basketball is in the modern era. He starts his career at Ohio State, transfers to South Carolina, has 2 pretty good years there, comes back to Ohio State, plays about 2/3 of the season, walks away from the program. I never got a clear sense of what it is or what it was that was the problem. And you know where he's going to be next year? South Carolina. That's, I
At least he's
mean,
only picked two schools, I guess you'd say.
yeah, but I mean, it's unreal. That hurt because it took one more body out of that rotation. And then it felt like Ohio State really got caught short inside. They added Aaron Bradshaw, who was a highly rated guy who had struggled with injury at Kentucky in his freshman year. He came in, but the thought was they wanted to keep their young guy who had really progressed, Okpara. He ended up transferring to Tennessee, so they
Right.
lost him. They were, as I say, they were caught short on the interior, I felt, all year long. And
No
I think
pun
that was a
intended.
big,
Yeah.
big part of the problem. You do have to say on the positive side, though, a couple of individuals. Bruce Thornton, who I've been a big fan of basically since he's been in the league. Um, he did it, I think, finally firmly established himself as an elite player in the Big Ten. 17.7 points, 3.4 boards, 4.6 assists, basically a 3-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, 50% overall, 85% at the line, 42% from three. I mean, that's just a great season all the way
Yeah.
around. And then I really liked the year Devin Royal had, a guy who was a player Michigan State recruited very heavily. He started off rough his freshman year, but toward the back end, picked it up. and showed potential. And I think he made good on it this season as a sophomore. 13.7 points, 6.9 boards per game, 52% overall, 77% at the line, only 28% from three. But I think there's a chance that 3-point shot comes around in the back half of his career and at least is respectable. Everything else he's got. So they had some guys have really strong individual seasons, but the whole was less than the sum of the individual parts,
Yeah.
which has
And that seems to
kind
be
of
the
been the
case
problem.
recently. Yeah, right. That
Yeah.
has been a problem for years, I think, at Ohio State, whether it was Holtman or now Diebler, that they just they're definitely less than, like you said, less than the sum of their parts. Boy, I tell you, there aren't many shows, probably basketball shows. In fact, I'm pretty confident there aren't any basketball shows that mention Memphis Sophocles. I think that's you're gonna get some serious knowledge listening to the show. But the nice thing about it, if you don't have to make that Faustian bargain, if you want to have great gutters at a great price, you can just contact the brothers to adjust your gutters. They will take care of you. They'll replace them, repair them. They'll clean them out. They'll put the leaf guards on. They can put the heaters on so it melts the ice, which I know I don't want to think about right now. It's May, but at some point there will be snow on our roof. So if you want to make sure that that doesn't cause a problem, contact the brothers Just Your Gutters today. Have them take care of all that stuff. They'll get up in the ladders so you don't have to and don't fall and hurt yourself. So 10% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. You can do that at our support page. The Final Four is on theschedule.com/support. Do it today. You'll be glad you did. The brothers will take care of you. So move on to another team. The team, I don't know. Well, it'll be interesting to see if going forward you continue to predict Indiana at its position and then say they actually won't finish that way, right? Like this is the team that's going to be with the Big Ten, but I don't think they'll be number one. So Indiana finished 19-13 overall, 10-10 in the Big Ten, 45th overall in KenPom. They missed the NCAA tournament. Mike Woodson's final year, as he announced he was going to retire before he got fired. Malik Renault, Omar Ballo were. That's interesting. The the and if you're watching YouTube, what happened to the L's in Ballo? I'm not quite sure what that is. But anyway, they had another. We'll just call it Indiana season, and they have been this way for at least in Mike Woodson's been there, and in some respects they've kind of been that way for a number of years, where they're just not quite what you expect they should be. It's a program that is, I guess you call them a blue blood, but they just have not really been blue blood
I
quality for
think you
quite some
gotta,
time. At
yeah.
this point, have we just sort of lost it? It's just like, unless you're 50, you don't really remember Indiana being a dominant team.
Well, they've got 5 national titles. And so that speaks to it. They've got a healthy number of Final Fours. That speaks to it. Obviously, they have a ton of Big Ten success historically,
Yeah. And a
but
big fan base, obviously, too.
and a
Huge.
huge fan base. Absolutely. So all those
Yeah.
things add up. But look, really, it's not even just post Knight because you could say the last 5, 6 years of Knight's era
Sure.
were
Yeah.
not, we're really talking about 30 years
Yeah.
where there's been these very occasional, you had the one run to the national title game under Mike Davis. Tom Crane had a Sweet 16 team. That's about it.
Yeah. In 30 plus years. That's
Had a
crazy.
lot of had a lot of individual stars, have put some guys in the NBA, but not much. And for somebody like my age, growing up, Indiana was the standard, definitely in the Midwest, and
Yeah.
arguably as much as anybody in the country, you know? And to see what's happened, it is remarkable. The Mike Woodson hire was a a misjudgment from the beginning.
That was a winning the press conference hire, wasn't it? Don't you think?
Not even, but that's the thing. Do you think? I don't think it really even excited the fan base particularly
Well,
because
it was a
Indiana,
saving face maybe move, right? Like we
well,
couldn't get the people
because
we wanted, and so we're just gonna Mike
they
Woods. Everyone
thought
knows
they'd
him.
get
He's
away with it
yeah,
because
that's
he was an
exactly
Indiana legend. He was a
yeah,
really, really good player in the late 70s in Indiana. But he was a guy who had been, he'd spent his whole career in the NBA, done some things. He'd been a head coach a couple stints and had been okay, solid, not great. Was a very well regarded assistant. He was actually an assistant on the Going to Work Pistons that won the title in 2004. But that was never a name that I think excited. Indiana is one of those places like a Kentucky, Kansas, that if they have a vacancy, they expect that the biggest names in the sport should be interested, should be crawling over broken glass to get to Bloomington, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it just hasn't worked out that way all the time. That said, when they hired Tom Crane, he was a star. When they hired
Yep.
Arch Miller, he was a star.
Right.
Like these were guys that had a lot of juice and there was excitement around them. So the Indiana fans were not totally wrong about the appeal of that job. It's just when they went into this last round after they fired Archie Miller, I think they found what a lot of other places have found, that all of a sudden it's gotten much harder to get a sexy name to want to move.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen as much as maybe it used to. And they were left in that situation. They hired Mike Woodson. I never thought it was likely to work, and it didn't work. And this was another example. They half-assed their way through most of the season, and then all of a sudden they catch fire. They win, what was it, 5 of their last 7 in the regular season to actually put themselves in position that if they'd done just a little something in the Big Ten tournament, they didn't have to win it. They might have gotten into the NCAA tournament. Instead, they lose in Indianapolis, right? By
Yes.
13 to Oregon, a
Yeah.
team that truthfully didn't have much of anything to play for. Oregon was already in the tournament. It was unlikely they were going to be able to make much of a climb in terms of their seeding. Indiana, essentially a home court advantage, playing in Indy, and everything to play for, and they go out and get waxed. That said it all.
Yeah.
Now, the response, I think, was a decent one. I think Darren DeVries has certainly done enough to suggest that there's a chance he does a good job at Indiana. I don't think he's an automatic. I actually, truth be told, and he was in the mix at Iowa too, right? But
Sort of. Yeah.
I think Iowa got the guy I think is more likely to have really, really good success
I
out
agree.
of those two. But it doesn't mean DeVries can't do it. And it's just the thing I wonder about. He's from, and you would know better than I because he was at Drake for a while. My sense of DeVries is he's a basketball first, last, and always guy. He's not a glad hander. He's not a big personality, right?
Yes.
And Indiana wants more than that from you. If they win, it won't matter.
Right.
But they want more than that. And that's why a guy like Tom Crane actually made a lot of sense there. He was kind of
Yeah.
perfect for it until it was demonstrated that he probably wasn't going to win at quite the level they wanted.
Right.
We'll see about DeVries. You look back at this season, it was, I mean, it just never came. It came together, and their win at Breslin was stunning.
Yeah.
Their win at home against Purdue was stunning. They had some big wins. They had a few impressive ones, but just overall, the offense was 66. That was mediocre. They really struggled shooting the ball from 3, and that kind of killed them. And playing the twin bigs, even though Renault and Ballo are the guys I both mentioned there, I didn't feel like that combo ever worked. And Ballo was another $2 million man reportedly, and what'd they get for it?
Not much.
Half-assed effort, okay production, didn't make anybody better around him. And that's, when we wax rhapsodic about all the Final Four teams and what they had on their rosters from the portal, let's remember programs like Indiana where the guards they got had terrible years. Ballo was not an answer to anything. Yeah, it can go that way too.
Yeah. And more often than not, it will. I mean,
and
just
and
by the
and
odds, right? I
it
mean,
can go that way when you actually go out and you do what many fans cry for, which is spend the money.
yep.
It can still go badly, and your whole thing gets screwed up.
Turns out if you spend money, it's not guaranteed success, right?
That's right.
All right. So let's move along and we'll go to the Oregon Ducks. They finished 25-10 overall. They're 12-10 in the Big Ten, right? So 12-8 in the Big Ten, obviously, right? Ken Palm overall, they're 27th. And they were, I feel like they're a team like Ohio State had been the previous couple of years, where they're a team that doesn't really impress you a ton, but yet they still have like the metrics that were really working for them. Their preseason record was very, very good. Obviously, they're
Yeah.
13-0 in the preseason. So that was yeah, was 13-0. Um, anyway, so they played really well early in the season, and then they struggled in the Big Ten, especially at home. They lost a lot of home games,
Yep.
uh, especially to other prior Pac-12 teams. But anyway, Dana Altman's did a pretty good job. They had Nate Biddle, Jackson Shell said they played Michigan State tough. They had Michigan State pretty much beaten, and then they just had the most monumental collapse I think I've ever seen of a team in the second half. And then Jace Richardson kind of did some stuff. So anyway, Oregon had a pretty good year also in the postseason. Just it was a pretty good first year, and it's I guess kind of what we thought. They were about where we expected. They were
Yeah.
sort of the upper third, upper middle third. Let's put it that way.
Good team. Not a great one, but good. NCAA tournament worthy, no question. You're right about the effect of the non-conference. The non-conference included wins over Texas A&M, San Diego State, and Alabama, all at the same event. And that really set them up. That
Yeah,
gave them,
locked them in.
in metrics terms, that cushion that they could withstand a run in late January and early February of 5 straight losses and 6 of 7. And they still weren't in bad shape. They ended up, what were they? So they went from when that run started. So entering the Purdue game on January 18th, they were 25th in KenPom. At the end of that losing 6 of 7 streak, they were 38th. Not great, but not a disaster considering you
Right.
lost 6 of 7.
Yeah.
And then they rebounded. Then they go on and they rip off 7 wins in a row to close the regular season. And they win their 8th game in a row in the first round of the Big Ten tournament, that game we just talked about over Indiana, before Michigan State beat them by 10 in the quarterfinals. So to snap the streak. And then they won a game in the tournament before getting beat by Arizona in a 4-point loss in the round of 32. So I would say overall, all things considered, a solid year for Oregon. Not great, not superlative, but solid. You did what you had to do for it to be considered to be a decent year. And we talk about individuals. Nate Biddle was obviously the first guy that came to mind. Their 7-footer, I think, had a really nice year. 14 points, 7.6 boards, 2.1 blocks per game. 51% overall, 81% at the line, a nice number for a big man, and
Hmm.
34% from three. So he was really good. And then their point guard, Jackson Shelstead, a sophomore, he had a lot of hype coming in. So a lot of people thought he was going to be a first team all league guy. He wasn't quite that, but 13.7 points, 2.7 assists per game, 45% overall, 84% at the line, 38% from three. And when Shelstead was on, he was a bit of a streaky player, but when he was on, he was a really tough cover because he's gifted athletically. He's very quick, has a quick release with the shot. And when he gets on a roll shooting the three, he becomes very difficult to deal with. So nice year. Nice. They also had TJ Bamba, who was a first team all league defensive
Yep.
uh, guy. I don't think he deserved it, but he was good. He didn't deserve it over some guys at Michigan State, in my opinion, but he was good.
Right.
Yeah, just I think one of those good, solid team. Not great, but very good.
All right. Well, the place you go, not good, but you will get great is Nudge Printing. Nudge Printing has some of the best apparel you'll find in around that's Michigan State stuff and also non-Michigan State. So head on over to nudgeprinting.com where you'll find a gigantic selection of apparel. You can get t-shirts, hoodies, coats. We have a bunch of it in our family. Everybody loves the stuff. I'm wearing one right now. Super comfortable. They're like the nicest t-shirts you're going to find. They'll be instantly your favorite t-shirts. I promise you. And I know we've had a number of people who have purchased ones and including ones that have our logo, which you can get at nudgeprinting.com/TFFINOTS. There you can get those things. But people wear them as their lucky shirts, but also just because they're so comfortable. In fact, we've had people mention they get them as gifts and then end up just keeping them. So they don't, but if that's the case, just buy two. So head on over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com, 20% off. You mention or type in Final Four as one word at checkout and do it today. You'll be glad you did. And so, what better way to end a show here, Rod, than than with Illinois? So, 22-13 overall, 12-8 in the Big Ten, which is, and for a team with the highest ceiling in the world, they were 17th in Ken Palm. Notable players: Kasparis Yakachunas, Kylan Boswell. You can put Ivisic on there if you want to. Uh, they had, they were the team that just everybody was in love with. Everybody meaning all the pundits from, well, anyone at Big Ten Network, Seth Davis, everybody thought this is a team that just could do no wrong as long as you didn't watch them lose by 103 points to Duke, uh, get blown out at home a number of times. They were a. This is the thing with this is a team that obviously lots of transfers. This has been sort of the way it has been at Illinois for the last few years with Brad Underwood, and next year will be no different. Although they've got some returning players, but a guy who continues to sort of look for different ways of winning as in Underwood, yet it kind of ends up at sort of the same place every time. I guess they were the year before they had a decent run with the Sweet 16, but for the most part, a team that I think they'd be sort of frustrating as an Illinois fan because you're kind of on the verge all the time. He's doing everything that a lot of the people on the message boards at Michigan State want them to do. Go get these these amazing players, but the results are obviously what you really care about. And I don't think they've been as what Illinois wants. I mean, certainly better than the previous era under John Gross, but still, there's a lot of wanting more here, especially when you think there is a ceiling, and they didn't come anywhere close to the ceiling, what everyone was
We
claiming the ceiling was.
we spent a lot of time talking about Illinois, and then at a certain point, it just got to be so much of a joke that it wasn't worth even mocking it anymore. The whole ceiling talk, and it never stopped. Like they went through such a poor spot. They were 9-8, coming off a 14-point loss at home to Michigan State, a 21-point loss in Madison to Wisconsin, and then a 90-point loss to Duke on a neutral site. So three losses in a row. They're sitting at 9-8 in the league. And finally, it seemed like the national media was throwing in the towel. But then they beat Iowa by 20. They
That's
beat
real hard to do. Yeah.
they beat Michigan by 20 in Ann Arbor, and they beat Purdue by 8. And then they beat Iowa by 12 in the first round of the Big Ten Conference tournament. And they're all back on the bandwagon again. That's all it took. Was a little modest 4-game run. And maybe we were right. Maybe we were right all along. Highest ceiling in the Big Ten. And then Maryland waxed them by 23
Yeah.
in the Big Ten tournament. They managed to beat Xavier in a first round NCAA tournament game by 13, but then Kentucky beat them by 9 in the second round, and that was it. And that's really what they were.
Yeah.
They were an okay, solid, good team that was never remotely close to being great. And you would hope people would learn some lessons, but they won't. that you cannot.
We know enough now to know that's not going to happen.
When somebody, it's like they say about people, right? When somebody tells you over and over who they are, believe them. At a certain point, just believe them. And that was what Illinois was, the college basketball team equivalent of that. They told us over and over and over again, because of the way they play and who they are capable of having little runs where things go right. But it is inevitable that it will turn and it will go wrong again. Why do I say that? A team that was, and I want to make sure I get these numbers exactly right, 29th in the country in three-point shooting frequency. So three-point attempts as a percentage of overall field goal attempts. 29th was 305th in three-point shooting percentage. If that is your profile as a team, it's remarkable you won as many games as Illinois did. And it
Yeah.
also was an illustration of the fact that they did do some things exceptionally well. They were a great rebounding team at both ends. They shot twos and defended twos exceptionally well. They were a good free throw shooting team. So there were things that were strengths, and they were strong enough to see them through to actually not be bad, just not be great.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I think this idea of the constant turnover has proven to be, again, something that is going to work against consistency in terms of your program. If you don't have continuity, it's extremely difficult to year in, year out win at the level you want to. And so we'll see. You know, you're right. He's got a few more guys back than he's had in recent years, but he still lost a bunch too, and he's still bringing in a bunch of new guys. So it's maybe not quite as extreme as it's been the last couple of years, but there's still a lot of roster turnover there. And I guarantee you, they're going to be picked high,
oh yeah.
and there will be a lot of talk about the ceiling once again of this team.
100%.
And we'll see how it comes through. 2 years ago, everything worked. They get to an Elite Eight. Year before that, disaster. Last year, maybe disaster's a little strong, but not a season that left many Illinois fans feeling good.
Compared to expectations, you certainly.
Right.
And I think, the stat you mentioned with the 3-point shooting, the high frequency at the high miss rate, obviously they rebounded really well, which is what gave them extra chances. But that just shows you that high variance way of winning. And when you go through the scores, they're losing by 20 plus points, multiple games.
Yeah.
And to still have a Ken Palm overall at 17 is pretty remarkable. But that just shows you just the variance in that, in the way they played. So,
They were the
and the way their
ultimate
season ended
boom
up.
bust team. When things were going well, it looks great. But things are not going to go well all the time for them. And when it goes badly, it goes really badly.
All right, so this brings us to the conclusion of our recap. I want to remind everyone to check out our sponsors at tffinots.com/support. There you can find ways to contact the Brothers Just Your Gutters, the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, Nudge Printing. And, this is the end of the middle of the Big Ten, sort of the middle, I guess, the middle third. Of these teams, I don't think anyone really underperformed a whole lot more. I think probably I was a little surprised that Illinois was as bad as they were in the sense that I thought they were going to be better than 12-8. And I mean, they guess they weren't. I wouldn't say they were bad, but they certainly didn't perform to the level I was. I was sold on the ceiling for quite a while too, because they definitely had a lot of individual talent, and they're going to have people, going to the NBA like Yakachonis. But the rest of the field pretty much ended where I thought they were going to be. Although I guess maybe I thought Indiana would be a little bit better too. But I was smart enough at this point to know that they probably weren't going to be a whole lot better.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know. I was never sold on Illinois' greatness. I thought they were a good team, not a great team, and that's exactly what they panned out to be. Uh, Indiana definitely a disappointment because I think the general feeling, and I would fall into this category, was that I believed that the guards they added would solve some of their backcourt issues, and that
Yeah,
did not happen. And when that was out, when it was obvious that their guard play wasn't going to be very good, that's kind of game over.
yeah.
So they were a disappointment. I think once again, and I need to be with you on this, and I've been unable to avoid it the last few years and buying into Ohio State and then finding out that the reality is thoroughly mediocre.
Yep.
And I did it again. Um, Kind of hard to understand when you have a point guard as good as they have, that usually means your whole thing is going to be elevated. And honestly, I don't put it on Thornton. I just think they didn't have enough pieces in particular spots. And then they got hurt a little by that midseason defection of Johnson, too, which hit their depth a little bit,
Yeah.
even where they were good in the backcourt. And so they would be up there on the list of disappointments for me, for sure.
All right. So until next time, when we go to the top of the Big Ten next week, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.